Well, Christmas can be such wonderful joy, a time of joy and happiness. We think of the joy and happiness of being with friends and family, though maybe not so much this year. But the wonderful joy and happiness, usually of being with friends and family, the wonderful joy and happiness just think of kids as children as they anticipate Christmas morning. It's always exciting. Those of us that are food lovers love this time of year with the all kinds of wonderful food, including my mom's shortbread, now my wife's shortbread, and chocolate, of course, too. But anyway, let's not go there. But food, we can think of that, brings lots of joy, and so many other things, just the Christmas music. There's just so much that's joyful at this time of year. Of course, for many people, there's a lot that can be stressful at this time of year and not joyful. And in fact, for many people, go through depression this time of year, especially this time of year. And it's a proven fact that more people are depressed this time of year than any other. And for many people, it's because of family, it's because of family relationships, it's because of the stress and anxiety that brings into their lives and the worry. For many people, it's because of grief and the pangs of old griefs that come back, or new losses that are really brought into the foreground and into the limelight of their lives. And so grief can really be touching people at this time of year too. And of course, there's also this vision of the perfect Christmas that nobody ever attains, and yet they try so hard, and yet you don't reach it. And so some people really feel sorrow over not reaching that perfect Christmas. So it's a real mixed bag of emotions this time of year. And for many people, it is the whole mix of emotions. It's not just that it's all joyful. It's not just that it's all depressing. It's that day to day, it's different. And hour to hour, there can be different emotions, a real mixed emotions, a real messy emotions. And we've been speaking about this sermon series being called The Most Messed Up Christmas Ever. And that's not actually referring to this Christmas. The most messed up Christmas ever was actually that first Christmas. And there, when we look back to the Christmas story, that very first Christmas, we're going to see that there are mixed emotions back then. Emotions are messy back then too. So we're going to take a look at those messed up emotions back then and let them speak into our lives today. So what are those mixed up emotions back then? Well, we see it when the Magi, they're approaching, they're getting close to where Jesus is, and they see that the star stops, and they are overwhelmed with joy. So there's the joy of drawing close to this new king. That is contrasted, that joy in Matthew chapter 2 is contrasted with incredible sorrow later in chapter 2, when we have this story of the infants massacred, the infants killed in Bethlehem. And Bible scholars think there was 10 to 30 infants killed maybe, but there's an incredible sorrow in the Matthew 2 story there over this. And of course, another emotion at play there is fear. That the wise men, they're overjoyed at one moment, there's the star stopped, here is Jesus, here's this new king. But the next moment they're warned not to go back to the old King Herod, because that's not going to go well. So there's fear around that. Of course, there's the fear of that Mary and Joseph would have when they take Jesus and they flee to Egypt. And when they come back because Herod has died, there's still fear because Herod's son is now in charge and he's no better than his dad. So there's fear. So here we have this real mixed bag of emotions in Matthew chapter 2 in this first Christmas, between incredible joy and incredible sorrow and incredible fear. And really this mix of emotions speaks to us about two things primarily. It speaks to us first off about life, but it also speaks to us about death. So let's take a look at these mixed emotions and think of them first with regards to life. And this is what the Magi would have had in mind as they're approaching Jesus. They don't really have in mind, we love that song, Mary, Did You Know? Mary, did you really know who this Jesus really is and what he would do? Did she really know? Well, certainly the Magi didn't know, but they knew enough to know that this was to be a good king. And they're probably thinking purely in earthly terms here of this is to be a great king of Israel, and that's great because the Israelites could use a break. They've had King Herod the Great, and he wasn't so great. They could use a good king. And so there's this joy over this king that is expected to bring this great political rule to be, really. That's what the Magi have in mind, but they're overjoyed at that, because that stands in great contrast to the kind of king Herod was. This is Herod the Great. And we know through not just studying the Bible, but other sources of history, that Herod the Great was actually, depended on your perspective, he was actually Herod the Horrible. He was great if you loved buildings. Yeah, he was the one who rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem. Yeah, good for him. And built many great buildings and whatnot. Yeah, and Judea actually flourished economically under his rule and such things. Yeah, good. So he was great if you loved buildings and politics, but he was not good if you liked people. He was ruthless. He had one of his wives executed. He had several of his sons executed. He, of course, had all those infants of Bethlehem executed. He was a terrible king in that regard. In fact, he was such a bad king in that when he got close to his own death, he had created orders that some of the noble people of Jerusalem would be rounded up, and they would be put to death, so that when Herod died, there would be mourning in the land and not rejoicing. Because he knew that people would breathe a sigh of relief when he died, that his reign over them was bringing sorrow and fear, that his death would actually bring rejoicing and hopefulness and a sigh of relief. Thankfully, those orders were not carried out. But indeed, his kingdom was split between three of his sons, and the son that was ruling in Jerusalem was a terrible ruler too. So bad, in fact, that the Romans eventually came through and gave him the boot. And that's why when we have in the Christmas story, we have King Herod in charge and in ruling over Jerusalem and Judea and Judah. But when you get to the Easter story, by that time it's actually Pilate is in charge as the prefect. So there's an incredible change there in the politics of the land, because the rule of Herod and his son were just such terrible things. And so the Magi, they're looking at this and they're saying, here is a good king born to the Israelites. And of course, those who knew the Old Testament prophecies would have that sense. In fact, even in that passage of Matthew chapter 2, we refers back to the Old Testament, and it says, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel. And so here's the sense of this king who will be a shepherd to the people of Israel. And we look to Isaiah chapter 9, we often read at Christmas time. And let me read part of it to you. For a child has been born for us. How Christmassy. A son given to us. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His authority shall grow continually, and there shall be endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom. He shall establish and uphold it with justice and righteousness from this time onward and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. And we read that, and we rightfully so automatically think of the divinity of Jesus, and we recognize Jesus as Lord, as King of Kings, Lord of Lords. But what we sometimes miss in doing that is the recognition here that Jesus actually is a ruler who rules well. It's not just that he's God, it's that he is a good ruler. This king that is to be born is to be a wonderful ruler, a ruler that rules with justice and not like the rest of the kings we've had. To be honest. And actually, Isaiah, you follow it through in chapter 10, and you'll see at the beginning there, you who make iniquitous decrees. Here it's talking to awful rulers who write oppressive statutes, to turn aside the needy from justice and to rob the poor of my people of their right, that widows may be your spoil and that you may make the orphans your prey. And they're speaking to this terrible rule of rulers, of kings, of oppressors, of society who really make life miserable for the people, who, of course, like Herod, bring fear, who are the cause of sorrow in people's lives. Contrast to that, Jesus is the shepherd, the good shepherd who even lays down his life for the sheep, the shepherd who puts the sheep first, who lives for the sheep, who rules for the sheep. Jesus is that good shepherd, the good ruler. And so this speaks to us about our lives in the here and now. What are our rulers like? Are they like Herod, and their influence on the world brings sorrow, it brings fear, it brings anxiety? Or are the rulers of the world like Jesus, bringing justice, good things happening for those people that need it the most? And also it speaks to us about we ourselves and the influence that we have on others. And we all have influence on others. We may not think of ourselves as leaders, but we all influence others in ways we don't even recognize. What kind of influence do we have on others? Do we bring upon them sorrow? Do we bring upon them fear and anxiety and stress like Herod? Or do we bring joy like Jesus? What can we do and with the Holy Spirit's help, to become more like Christ in our influence on others, to have good leadership in the lives of others and not be like Herod? So that's one thing, the mixed emotions. As we think of the mixed emotions of the Christmas, that first Christmas, we can be caused to think of leadership in the world today, including our own. What is it like? What does it bring to people's lives? But here's the second part. It doesn't just speak about life. It also speaks about death. And keep in mind here that the Christmas story, it really brings, we often skip over it, right? We just get to the part about Jesus being born. We talk about the shepherds, we talk about the Magi, and we stop there. But the Christmas story keeps going. And it goes to that part that we often miss out, about the infants being massacred in Bethlehem, because Herod wants to get rid of Jesus. And so he doesn't know how to find him, so he figures just killing all the infants will do it. And so here, Matthew says, as he's writing about this, he really picks up on the emotion of the people of Bethlehem and quotes the Old Testament to really capture their emotion. And so I'm going to read that from Matthew 2, which is a quotation from the Old Testament itself. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more. Refusing to be consoled, just this real sense of sorrow. And so here's part of the mixed emotions of that first Christmas, that messy emotions of the Christmas story. That there's this incredible sorrow and this incredible fear. And Bethlehem at this time was probably a town of about 1,000 people. And you can imagine how it would have impacted the entire community. Just the fear that would have gripped everyone, the sorrow the entire community would have felt, for those who had lost their loved ones just so horrendously. Death really does bring strong emotions. And as we think of death, how it touches people even today, it brings strong emotions, so much so that some people don't ever want to talk about it or hear people like me talk about it. They just don't want it to be a topic of discussion because it just brings such difficult and heavy emotions to the forefront of their hearts and minds. And it is a difficult topic, but indeed we must talk about it. There's incredible sorrow with that loss that we experience through death. There can also be incredible anger and frustration when we think it's an unfair death. But really, when we're speaking about death here, death is actually a symptom of a bigger problem. And that problem is the sin that separates us from God. Sin separates us from God, and the ultimate conclusion, the ultimate road that leads us down is to one from complete separation of God, death. But here's the good news. This baby Jesus wasn't just to be a good king, better than Herod, but he was also to be the king that would deal with our greatest problems. He would be the king that would not just deal with the difficult troubles that the most needy are going through, but he would deal with the greatest need that we all have, that we all stand before a holy God in our sinfulness, separated from him, so we have this incredible need for reconciliation with God. And it's this infant Jesus. Mary, did you know? I doubt she really knew it. The Magi certainly wouldn't have known it. Really, nobody really knew at that time just what Jesus would do to reconcile sinful humanity to a holy God. Jesus is that good shepherd who laid down his life for the sheep. And that can be us. When we accept that gift, when we trust Jesus, when we come to him just in full dependence upon his goodness towards us, his grace. And so here we have these mixed emotions in the Christmas story of this incredible weeping and sorrow because of the death that we hear about. But also there's the incredible joy of the Magi, and yet they didn't realize just how much joy there really ought to be because of what Jesus would do about death and about this problem. Now remember, death is just a symptom of a bigger problem, that sin which separates us from God. Jesus has dealt with that at the cross. And so through Jesus, we have this incredible joy when we think about death, that it no longer becomes this thing of it's the end and that's it, but it becomes, it's the turning of the page to start a new chapter. And we don't fully know what it looks like, but it certainly involves the resurrection of the dead to eternal life with God. And we don't fully know what all that looks like, but we look forward to it with joy, knowing that God is good and God is gracious. It will be good. And there are hints in the Bible, strong hints of what it's going to be like. And so we look forward to it with incredible joy. And so Jesus, this infant Jesus, actually brings incredible joy into the discussion about death. And so when we think about our own deaths, does that only cause fear and anxiety and stress and worry and sorrow? Or is there an element of joy there also? There can be that element of joy. You know, there's a song I love to hear every Christmas time. It's by Stephen Curtis Chapman, and it's a song called Home for the Holidays. Or I'll Be Home for Christmas, sorry. No, something like that. Anyway, I'll include it in the playlist of songs and carols that go along with today's service, and just a reminder to watch for that. So I'll include the song, and I won't tell you too much about the song. I'll let you listen to it and hear the story that it tells. But the thing I love about this song is it captures both the sadness that is a real thing because of death, because of loss, but it also captures the joy that is a real thing because of the grace of God, because of the goodness of God. I'm not going to say anything more about that song. You enjoy it and listen to it. But what about our mixed emotions at Christmas time? That first Christmas, there were mixed emotions. There was incredible joy as the Magi saw the star. Here's a good ruler. Here's a good ruler who would do so much more than even what the Magi expected. But there was also sorrow. What about the mixed emotions in our lives this Christmas? What about the emotions we draw out of other people? Are we like Herod? Or is there something about us that is Christ-like? But also, what about the emotions when we think of death? Is it nothing but fear and anxiety and worry and sorrow? Or actually, is there an incredible joy associated with thinking about death and what death leads to? Today we lit the candle of joy because this baby Jesus was born, and that changes everything, even what death means for us. Christmas might be messed up this year, but may you have a merry, if messy, Christmas. There can be a lot of sorrow this year, a lot of fear this year, but there can also be a lot of joy. May you have a Merry Christmas.